The Amityville Horror, Stuart Rosenberg's 1979 haunted house film that stars James Brolin, Margot Kidder and Rod Steiger. I was going to be taking a bit of a break from YouTube following the piracy issue I detailed in my last video, the review of One False Move. But it's funny how things can work out sometimes, because just as that video had gone live, 88 Films contacted me and asked me if I would do some reviews of some of their releases. I think they've got a future release coming out soon, as I record this, of American Pie. But I said that's not really my sort of thing. I'd only recently noticed that they'd issued the Amityville Horror earlier this year, 2024. I think it was the 18th of March. And I said, if you want me to take a look at something now, that would be the ideal candidate. This came through the post a few days later. Perfect timing. So here I am doing another review video much sooner than I expected. And this one is a bit of a stunner. The case inside the pack does come with a reversible inlay, and on the reverse side, I've reversed mine, is the original poster art for the Amityville Horror in 1979. Now, at that time, I was just slightly too young to be able to sneak into a cinema to see an X-certificated film. It's no longer rated an 18 here in the UK, and quite right. Should probably never have been an 18 really. Should have been a AA here for 14. Then I would have been able to go straight in and see it all those years ago, and probably had a great time seeing it on a big screen in a dark cinema, because that's the effect it had in here last night. Now, in 1979, the book was rather famous, possibly made so because the film was coming, but many of us at school, I remember, were reading Jay Anson's book, and I can remember reading it late at night in my bedroom, pretty dark actually, but under the bed sheets, reading this pretty terrifying book. It really did have some memorable moments in it. And I thought, I can't wait to see the film, but of course, I couldn't really go and see it, it being an X certificate. And so I had to wait a while, but Ken Films did issue a 400-foot, 17-minute extract edition of the Amityville Horror. And so when our local film library got those extracts in, my brother and I, we hired it. I think it was £2 for 3 days. But we were both extremely disappointed with it. We thought that maybe it was a bad edit of the film. Perhaps they hadn't selected the right scenes to include in that release. What we didn't know, although it would have been a foreign language, Piccolo Films had actually issued a 2x400-foot over in Germany, so that would have been a preferred choice if we had known about it, had been able to get at it and been able to hire a copy over here. But alas, it's still one I haven't seen. But interestingly, my colleague of the British Film Collectors Convention, Mark Williams, has recently published his long-awaited book on the Super 8 gauge, and this is mainly exploitation films and horror films, that sort of thing. And in here, he's got the Ken Films release detailed, and also the Piccolo Films, the 2x400 foot. And I don't know what this one is underneath, but it looks a bit nasty. I'm sure someone out there will actually identify that. John and Mondo Chelovek, perhaps, Trevor at Double Bill Movies. Anyway, I digress. This was the first home movie release of the Amityville Horror. I don't know which one came first, but I do know that Ken Films actually made it into this country before the film was even released into cinemas. And so the first time I actually saw the Amityville Horror all the way through was when it was broadcast on television over here. I don't know if it was cut, but I have read that in America it was cut, and must have been cut quite substantially, because the film has a running time of 1 hour and 57 minutes, and it was cut to fit within a 2-hour time slot in America. So with all the commercials over there, must have been quite substantially edited. So what I saw, I don't know, but what I do remember is that I didn't think much of it. It wasn't scary, and so I never purchased or rented the VHS when it came out. I just didn't feel I wanted to. Never actually eventually purchased that 400-foot Super 8 edition, but I looked at it a few times, and maybe now I will actually get one. But this was purchased for me. This is the 1982 sequel, Amityville 2, The Possession, and this one I did find rather scary. Perhaps now is the time to watch this one again, or perhaps maybe 88 Films will get rights to the sequel and they'll issue that as another fabulous 4K release. when the DVD arrived, this pack appeared, and this has got the original version of the film, 1979, and then the remake, which I was interested in seeing to see if they could make it any more scary than the original. But actually I found the original more scary than the remake, which I can remember I thought was pretty good for the first half of it, and then it seemed to go off the rails for me. I did rather enjoy the original, but again I felt there was something lacking. But with this 4K, all of a sudden I feel like I've seen the Amityville Horror for the first time. I think it helps when you see these creepy films in a dark cinema, and that's essentially what we did in here last night. It's a cinema in miniature, the lights are all out, and you've just got this big screen in front of you. So this is a 1:5:1, and in here I think we project those about 8.5 feet wide, so when you're only sat around 10 feet away, 10 or 11 feet away, it does give quite an impression. The sound on here, there are 3 options. There's a new DTS-HD remastered sound, which I left on. It's the default and I left it on. But there's a scene early on. Now, it's a haunted house. Why is it haunted? It's because there were some murders in that house, and you've got a flashback to those murders, which can be pretty gruesome. But then the police are there. The stretchers, the trolley stretchers, are being put outside the house and the bodies are being put on them, and you can tell immediately the sound on those is not right. It's sort of 3D sound. It's as though someone's fabricated it, and I thought immediately that isn't right. And there were several more sequences throughout the film, like when the cat appears at the window with a screech, Margot Kidder, she screams at one point. They all sounded a bit faked to me, as though they'd had to do something to give it the surround effect to try and make us jump. And so I went back and I watched the second sound option, which is actually a Dolby Stereo option. So you've got left, centre, right and surround, and that's encoded within DTS-HD, and that sounded exactly like I would have expected the Amityville Horror to sound. It's got a mono sound option as well, but I ran a bit of that and it did sound the same as the Dolby Stereo, but didn't have the surround sound aspect, so it didn't envelop you so much. So of the 3 soundtracks, I recommend the second one, which I thought was going to be from a 70mm blow-up, but this film does not appear to have had a 70mm blow-up. There must have been Dolby Stereo prints around, and that's what that sound has been taken from. I haven't been able to find out the worldwide box office of this film, but it cost $4.7 million approximately to make, and the US domestic box office for this was $86.5 million. That also gets recorded everywhere as the worldwide gross, so a bit of a grey area as to how much this took, but potentially well over $100 million. This was a massive success, so it's only right that when this is issued as a 4K, it reflects something that was a massive success, and the print quality of this is beautiful. It must be the finest grain negative stock that was used, or something really clever has been done to it that hides everything that has been done, but it looks to me like a pure negative transfer that's been mastered almost to perfection, because you look at the Blu-ray that's taken from the same 4K master and it's just not a patch on the 4K. This really is quite a special disc, and so I don't think anyone will be disappointed with it. You combine it with this beautiful packaging which creates such a good impression, and you put the disc in, it comes up with a wonderful 88 Films logo. That's quite impressive. It's all going well. Then you play the film, and the image quality, it really is something rather special to look at. There are 1 or 2 soft focus shots. That's normal with filmmaking, you always get that. Doesn't mean to say that someone's adjusted the scanner while it's been automatically scanned to adjust the focus just for that one shot. That's not what happens. It was on the day when it was shot. You get a couple of slightly soft focus sequences, but all this comes together to give you a very impressive home movie release, a home video release that I don't think anyone will be disappointed with. Some won't find the Amityville Horror at all scary. I think if you're watching it on a telly, just make sure you've got the room as black as possible. If you're watching it in a home cinema, have it as big as possible and have that second soundtrack option up as loud as possible, and I think you'll have a great time with the Amityville Horror. Certainly got a bit of nostalgia for me. I'd like to go back and see that Ken Films 400-foot extract release again and see if I prefer it now to what I did all those years ago. But Overall, a wonderful release, and I'm very pleased to have finally seen the Amityville Horror properly. Thank you 88 Films. If they all look like this, I think I'm going to be in for a treat with whatever I take a look at next. Right, I think that brings us to the end. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a like and perhaps consider subscribing so I'll be encouraged to carry on creating content like this. Until the next video, bye bye for now.